Welcome everybody and happy Friday. Today we're going to look at how to get ready for audit. So let's begin. I'm just going to share my screen with you all. And we'll start with some checklists for getting ready for audit. So we've got a stage 1 and stage 2 checklist. So the first thing in getting ready for audit is to be going through your stage 1 checklist. So you've got two parts to a certification audit, whether that's a provisional certification audit or a full certification audit. You've got a stage 1 and you've got a stage 2. So in stage 1, that means a desktop audit to ensure all the correct documents are in place and that the evidence is compiled so that the auditors can systematically go through and check this off. So for stage 1, the things that we'll want to have ready, I've put into 3 different categories. And that's the way I would suggest that you present them to the auditors so that it's not a big mess and they don't have to muddle and wade through lots of different folders and forms. Just try to give it to the auditors in 3 folders. 1, identification documents. 2, key business documents, and 3, your governance documents. So just making sure you can see that screen as well. I'm just going to change the view. So now we are looking at identification folder, key business document folder, and governance document. Now I'm just going to flick back to your checklist that we were looking at, which is your stage 1 checklist. And there we go again. So here we are. I've also got the checklist aligning to those 3 folders. Folder 1, ID qualifications. Folder 2, key business documents. And folder 3, your governance documents, which is where you'll also keep your compliance management system as well. So this is a list of documents that you need to get ready. So first of all, for every staff member that you have in your service, you're going to need 100 points of ID. This is going to include a license, a passport, Medicare card or bank card, that normal 100 points of ID. Tick them off as you complete for each staff. When you have actually completed all of your staff evidence documents and identification documents, just give this a tick and you know that you're finished there. The working with children check for staff members. I tend to like to just do it across the board. It's easier that way, unless you're in a service that in no way requires face-to-face service, or that a particular position is never going to come into contact with children. Then you needn't worry. But I find it easier rather than remember or have a system to figure out who does and who doesn't. I just ask everybody for working with children check, a national police check, and of course from the 2nd of February now, everybody will need a worker screening check as well. So once you've collected the evidence, which is the documents, whether you photograph them or whether you photocopy them, it doesn't matter, but they do need to be put into the file for the auditor to check that they're current. The next thing you're going to want is all of your staff members' qualifications, whatever they may be. And if some of those people that you're employing, like social workers or nurses, have a registration body, you're going to need their registration bodies as well. Now, of course, not all staff are going to be members of a registration body. Support workers don't need to be. Somebody who's working as a social worker does need to be. Somebody working as a psychologist does need to be. And somebody working as a registered nurse does need to be, or even an enrolled nurse. So if there's a professional body, then you need to have a copy of that certificate to show its currency. That goes for occupational therapists and physiotherapists, exercise physiologists, and if you're an accountant who is going to be running a plan management business, it's also essential to have that as well. If you happen to be a builder who's going to be applying for specialised disability accommodation or home modifications or vehicle modifications, there can be professional bodies involved with those as well. So also, it's also mandatory for every single staff member, regardless of their position, to have completed the 90-minute mandatory worker module on the NDIS Commission's website. Every staff member must have that, as does a director of a company or directors, general managers, board members, etc. Everybody needs to have that certificate. It takes about 90 minutes and you download it when you're finished. So that's our identification folder. Next is our key business documentation. This is where you'll be collecting a range of regulatory type documents. Professional indemnity insurance for your business, professional indemnity insurance for anyone that you may be employing as an ABN worker, public liability for your business, a public liability for anyone you're employing as a subcontractor, ABN worker, or has their own company. The only people you won't be seeking public liability and professional indemnity insurance for are those you're employing under an employment contract where you pay as you go tax. So ABN contractors, proprietary limited contractors all need to have their own insurances, because in essence, they actually are working for themselves because they're subcontracting to you. If you're a proprietary limited company, you need director's liability insurance and accident and injury insurance, unless you're paying yourself a wage and you're going to be covered under workers' compensation. Every staff member working for you is going to need to either be as an employee covered under your workers' comp, or if they're an independent contractor, they'll need to have their own accident and injury insurance, because if they're not covered under your workers' compensation as an employee, they need to be covered under something. So they need to take out their own insurance or accident insurance. More key business documents that you'll be needing to put into this number 2 folder is your workers' compensation insurance. If you have no staff, you'll need to ask your insurance agency in your state whether you're going to need an active workers' compensation policy. There are some states who have a benchmark of how much you need to be paying out before you need to take out workers' comp. So please check that for your particular state, if you would. You're going to need a copy of your service agreement within these business documentations. This is something in stage 1 that the auditors will be looking for. Your NDIS participant service agreement. This is a key document to outline the services you'll provide and the conditions under which you'll provide it. There is a practice standard which is very, very much around this, and they will be looking very carefully to see that you've met the practice standard and quality indicators on this document. A copy of further documents as well, which is going to be things such as your complaints policies and incident management policies. So we would say all of your policies need to be in the key business documentation folder, all policies in there. These are the key ones, of course, but that is not where it ends. There's many more. So everything policy-wise goes into your key business documentation folder. Ensure that you've read them and implemented them. Having some understanding of these before you go to audit is the smartest thing you can do, because it's not a good look when you don't understand your policies and you're the owner of the business. So having all of those ready for the day you're going to be interviewed at stage 2 is a good idea. So prepare all these documents, and in between stage 1 and stage 2, you'll be able to take time to read them and really understand them. Then there's the 3rd folder, and that's our governance folder. So in here, we've got things like your organizational chart. We've got all of the relevant regulatory things around your staff, the vetting of their, the staff members you're going to be hiring. This is where we're going to demonstrate that you have a really good view of when all of these documents fall due, and such as first aid, police checks, etc. The governance is around really taking a broad look from a helicopter and being able to see the whole set of things that need to be monitored, such as insurance documents and staff documents and any other thing that is associated with regulation. So we're also going to need, if you're going certification audit, you're going to need a business plan. Now, you can have a business plan or a strategic plan, but I think it's sensible to have both. A strategic plan, something that outlines your vision and where you're going to, and the business plan, which doesn't need to be lengthy, will explain how you're going to operationalize or implement that strategic plan. So it does say one or the other, but I think it's good to have both. All of the job descriptions for any of the roles that you intend to be hiring for need to be also available in this governance documentation, and any kind of business continuity plan for you to outline what your plan B is if something should go wrong, such as, you know, your software system fails, or you've got electricity out for days on end, or there's a fire in the building. Everyone has to be found. Other accommodation needs to be found for everybody, or if we have another COVID outbreak. So business continuity is very important and will be asked for at your audit. So this completes the stage 1 documents. So let's go and have a look, and let's say you've collected all of these documents now, you put them into the folder 1, folder 2, folder 3. So you've got some of that evidence, which is really, really good. Now we're going to have a look and say, well, where are we going to sort of list that so we can have a really good overview to see where all these dates are falling due. So this is where your compliance management system comes in. And this is the front page of that compliance management system. It is an Excel spreadsheet. It has quite a number of tabs on it, as you can see, and it covers off on all of the practice standards within the NDIS quality and safety standards. So number 1, if we're heading into stage 1, we're going to assume for this that you are all new providers, you haven't had an audit yet, so you're going into your first stage 1. So the first tab on this register is called Key Decision and Governance Log, and this is about what you do in terms of making decisions and how you record these important decisions, especially if they're going to have a financial impact on the business or could represent some kind of a risk. Now, I think the most important column here is column F, is where you want to ask yourself, the decision I've just made, does that represent a risk for my company? So for example, decision 1, today's date, decision maker, Gina. Key decision, I decided to go and purchase a $50,000 van to take the participants around, of which I have none yet, for example, because I'm a new service. And the rationale for that decision was to be able to take them to many more services and give them much more variety. Does it represent a risk for the business? Well, yes. Perhaps if you don't have a lot of money, that represents a financial risk. Maybe you have tons of money and that's not a problem, but it's also going to represent perhaps a risk because you're going to have to monitor who's going to drive that van, and people who get behind the wheel, you're going to need to monitor their licenses, their insurances, and to make sure that they take care while they're behind the wheel. So in some ways it could represent a risk, but that's always going to be about your particular situation. So if it's a loan, any loan represents a risk for a business. So this is the column that's most important for recording where there's a risk. And where you say yes in this column, you then need to transfer that risk into your risk register. And that is another tab here. So if we were to scroll down here, we'll come to corporate risk register. So we would go and transfer that information into the corporate risk register. So that might be risk number 1, what can happen and how can it happen? Well, the van may get into an accident, or one of my staff may not be licensed to drive that, or maybe one of the staff is over the limit because they went out for a big night the night before. So essentially it could be a risk of, staff not being able, not being well equipped to drive that van. So you just want to nut this out. This is like bringing into your awareness and and massaging through the consequences should something happen, the likelihood of it happening, and identifying a risk around that. So we do have staff that will go out partying and come to work the next day and possibly be still over the limit. So having something in writing, like a drug and alcohol policy, to make it really clear, or in your code of conduct that says any staff that may not come to work unless they have a blood alcohol content of nil, is probably the most sensible thing to do. And that could be placed in your code of conduct very, very easily, if you don't have a drug and alcohol policy. And then this is where we have a date for review, so that you're constantly having to have a look at these risks that you've nutted out, and they stay in your awareness. So this convinces the auditors and any standards assessor that, okay, at least they're looking at their risks, and that's what they want to see. We can't live without risk. We can't ever have no risk, but we certainly need to be aware of it, and we need to minimize it where we can. So coming back to the directory and where we were, the key decision and cost log is a bit like the staff meeting you have when you're not having a staff meeting. When you're not big enough to have staff meetings and minutes and actions that arise from those, which are all the evidence that the auditors are looking for to show you have proper governance in place and processes in place for making decisions, you can just use a simple register like this to record some of those more important decisions that you're making, and being aware of whether any of them represent a risk. So that will demonstrate to somebody that they understand governance and they're actually doing something about trying to implement some good governance and decision-making records. So that's a win in a number of areas. The other thing is, it's really important that you do record your decisions and that you don't just make decisions on the fly and without writing down the reasons for them. So that's just good business sense. So if you notice, there are some red ones and some white ones. So for stage one, and if you have absolutely no clients yet, you'll only need to do the red ones. So I have a little tab here on my compliance register, which I'm going to be giving to everybody. The red tabs indicate which registers must be completed for stage one audit, or a verification audit, which is the low risk services. And most people that are here for certification, which is the higher risk services. So red tabs indicate which registers need to be completed for your stage one, and also if you have no clients. And you can see the difference between the red ones and the white ones. If you look at the red ones, you don't need to have a client in your service to be able to complete these red registers. But for you to complete some of these white ones, you need to have had a client. So definitely the second time around, people are using the red and the white fonts to get ready for their audit. But most certainly, if you're an unregistered service now, but you have 5 or 10 clients already, and even if you have one client, you still have to go in there as a service and declare that you've got clients. Now, if you have clients, you would naturally need to use the support plan review schedule, the participant risk register, the staff performance appraisal schedule, the staff supervision schedule, complaints management. You may have complaints. If you have participants, you may have some, you may not. You may have feedback, or you may not. You may have been able to get some feedback on how your clients thought you handled their complaint process. You may have some incidents already. You may have had such severe incidents that you did a root cause analysis to try and figure out what happened so it doesn't happen again. And if these things are happening, like complaints and incidences, then you're going to want to have some line items in your quality improvement register. But until you have a participant, you won't be using these registers. So for those of you who are going into your first registration and you're just a provisional certification audit, you will just be sticking to these red font registers. So the next one you can see is regulatory compliance. Incredibly important, okay? So what we've done is we just have a few that we've done as examples. So let's just say, here's the name of a business. It's called Replay. That business needs to have public liability insurance, professional indemnity insurance, director's liability insurance. Now, we must put a date for when we cited the document, because that's what the auditors want to know that you've done before you put it into that folder that we talked about. And the folder that we were going to put all of our insurances in was folder number 2, business processes and business documents. So the date you cited it, there's no license number, it's an NA, but there will be policy numbers. So we'll expect to have this column populated. We'll also need to see the due date. The most important column here, which is why it's red, is the due date, because then we're going to be able to follow that and see when it's due. As you complete each line, put complete. And so you know, if this is green, I've fixed that line up, because the last thing you want to do is show an auditor a register that has empty columns. If you're not going to use one of these columns, you must put not applicable, or they're going to come back and say it's incomplete. It's just in their nature. It's in the nature of an auditor to do that, because if it's blank, it's not saying anything. If it says NA, it's saying it's not applicable. So all of these columns need to be full. And if there's a legitimate reason for not having one filled out, then you put not applicable. So we've got the business insurance, public liability, professional indemnity, director's liability. Then we've got the business owner themselves, their car registration, their comprehensive insurance, their license, okay? Then we've got their employee, their public liability, because they're being employed under an ABN instead of paying tax through the business. So they're an ABN contractor, they're going to need public liability, professional indemnity, and because they're not a company, they're just a sole trader, they won't need director's liability. Director's liability is when you are a company or a corporation. So Joanne, the employee, is going to have public liability, professional indemnity, her car registration, because she's going to be doing some driving while she's doing some work. Anyone who has to get into their own vehicle as a matter of course in doing the job for you as an employer, as an NDIS employer, you must have their car registration, their insurance and their license, and all the numbers and policies that go with that, with all of the dates due. Because what can happen is, if somebody gets into the car, takes a client out, and just accidentally they haven't paid their license and it's 2 days overdue, it's 2 days overdue. And if it's 2 days overdue, it's expired. If it's expired, their car registration is null and void, and so is the insurance that went with it. And so is the comprehensive insurance or third-party insurance. Every insurance is null and void. And that also includes that every insurance you have over your business, if someone tried to claim on that because this person was, even if it was accidentally breaking the law, no insurance is going to be validated or honoured. So that's the reason you're watching the dates on people's insurances, the dates on their car registrations, the dates on their licenses, the dates on their professional registration groups. It's up to you, because when you decided to become an NDIS provider, you took on the obligation of making sure that everybody is compliant. And the thing that happens is that at the end of the day, it will be you, the business owner, that gets sued. So this is in your best interest to ensure everybody's documents, licenses, registrations, and insurances, making sure that all of them are up to date and due, well and truly due. So you don't want anyone getting into any of your cars or their own cars with a license that's even 1 day expired, because an insurance company wants any reason they can not to pay out. So we've gone to one of the most important ones here. So every staff member and the business needs to have the details recorded here. So this is like all the documents for these. We already, we're going to store them in a folder, but that's not the easiest way to look and see when the dates are due. Let's say you've got 20 staff and you just put all these documents religiously into those 20 folders. but you've got no oversight. You've got no helicopter view of when everything's falling due. So really what you want is something like this, where you can just sort the dates due, looking at this once a week, and you know who's due, and you're going to be asking them for their registration renewal. And can I please have a copy of it? I have to cite it. I'm going to take a photo of it and I'm going to put it in the folder. So you're always compliant and your business risk is reduced. So we'll go back to the directory page. The next one is the HR training matrix, which is quite an easy one. This is really about the training, continuing professional development that your staff are going to do. But when you onboard a staff member, it does say in the practice standards that you're going to do a bit of a needs assessment. What kind of training, what kind of gaps does your staff member that you're onboarding have? Is there parts in their knowledge that are missing that you need for that job? So do a training needs analysis as soon as you onboard somebody, and then annually, if you can, when they're having their performance appraisal. So the staff member, what did the training needs analysis turn up? What training might be required? Let's say they said, I don't really know anything about assisting with medication. So you would say, okay, well, here's Joanne. She really says she's not real sure about doing assist with medication. So we're going to try to, arrange in the future some assist with medication training. Is this continuing professional development? Yes. The name of the training that was taken and the file evidence. Did you put the evidence in the file to show that she did this training? Because it's not enough for an auditor. You could have 50 clients, 50 episodes of training here, but if we can't see the evidence in your folder, as far as we're concerned, you could be making it up. So we have a document that aligns to everything that's in these registers, because that's the evidence. This is the helicopter view, the date due. It's, we can watch and see what needs to be done, but the evidence has to go in the folders. So that is for training. The next one is the staff mix, the staff matrix, which is really important because this is where you collect all of that legal stuff about staff. Staff name, their qualification, and the professional body. Remember, I talked about registered nurses, psychologists, OTs, physiotherapists, accountants who are acting as accountants. All of those types of positions have a professional body, because the difference between just belonging to a professional body for the sake of it and having to be in a professional body to be able to do your job is a very big difference. It means that if a psychologist is not registered under APRA, they're not actually allowed to practice. Same with a physio. So there are some professions who cannot do that profession unless they're registered with a professional body. And you need to make sure that you've got the document is current, and that you've put the date here and you monitor when it's due. Your working with children check is the same. Your police check is the same. They don't come with a finite expiry date. But I suggest that you consider this. Uber drivers and taxi drivers have to have a new check every year. They're not dealing with as much of a variety, as much as a vulnerable population as your staff are going to be. So I really think it's not a big ask that staff get a police check once a year, rather than, as I said, there is no expiry date on them. They consider 3 years to be enough, but I just think if Uber drivers can get a police check annually, so can a support worker. And then you've got the first aid, which of course will have an expiry date on it, so you need to monitor that. We know that CPR only lasts a year, whereas I think first aid can go 2 or 3 years. I'm unsure. The certificate, so that you can monitor to be sure that every staff member that's on board has a certificate, you must put the date they completed their NDIS Commission Worker Orientation certificate, because your auditors will be looking for that. It's not enough just to have the date and the staff member's name. You must have the certificate, and it must align to what you've put here. Then your worker screening check, which is newly out. So you'll be wanting to put the dates in here and have a corresponding piece of paper in your file as well. Now, in terms of what you would mandatorily want somebody to know, and which the practice standards actually allude to as well, we really want your staff, before they start working for you, to understand abuse and neglect, to understand manual handling so that you have minimized your risk for any harm to come to staff or for any workers' compensation claims down the track. You really want them to understand complaints. You really want them to understand incidents. And I think when I audit an organization and they have no understanding of these two things, that's of great concern to me, and this one as well. So these are really quite mandatory, and there's an expectation in the practice standards that as an employer, you will ensure that your people understand this. Then you have room for other things. For example, if you eventually take on behaviour support implementation, then you would want to make sure that every staff member that works in that area has either already done some training and they can prove it, or you ensure that you are able to provide some and you have the date that that training was done and the certificate that you will get as a result of it. So this is where you can align the training to the participant need that you will be taking on at different times, whether it's high intensity care like bowel care or whether it's behaviour support. You'll be able to show that you have been monitoring your staff skills and you know that which staff have the skills and which staff don't. So there we are. So we're back to, we've done staff HR matrix. So now we come down to something relatively simple, which is there's a requirement in the practice standards at audit for you to list, to know when you're going to review your policies. So the easiest way is if you have a list of policies and you make a hypothetical date for when you are going to review them, and sensibly that would be, you know, you'd start having a good review of your policies 6 months out from your next audit. So if your next audit after this one is going to be in 18 months, then you would start looking at your policies in about a year. And then you need to say why you've updated them. And if you've discussed this with other team members, maybe it was suggested, and that most importantly, that you don't just update the policy, you tell people what the updates were, because people aren't going to know. What's the point in writing and changing a policy if nobody's going to know that it's been changed? The bigger the organisation, the more you would use, you know, the person leading it, etc. So you need a record of the fact that you intended to review the policy, you reviewed the policy, you talked about it with the people that it impacts on, and that some education was done around, you know, what those changes were. So that's really important too. You will get pulled up on that if you don't have that in place. The biggest one is your corporate risk register. This is where you need to have a look and see, for the type of business that you're intending to run, what are your risks? Now, some of those risks are very standard corporate and financial risks. You know, a risk to the business is not being able to have good cash flow. A risk to the business is if there was a change in policy, which is unlikely to happen at this time. But we do have little risks that crop up, and that can be, you know, the independent assessments. What's that? How does that impact on your business? The fact that there's going to be a change in the way things are assessed, or if the price goes down on a product, if the product is taken off the market, if, you know, all sorts of things that could impact financially on your business. And then you also look at other things like politically and with your staff, and, you know, in terms of if there's a COVID outbreak and etc. And look, there's an example list of things that you could consider. I don't suggest you copying and pasting them because they're not going to be useful for everybody, but there is a range of things that could prompt your thinking and get you thinking about, well, what are my risks? And it's a requirement of a major variety that you have this corporate risk register and you've worked it through in rating the risk, identifying a way to manage that risk, and a date that you're going to review the risk that you've identified. Once again, empty columns are like a moth to the flame as far as an audit is concerned. They will say it is incomplete, and they'll be right. If you leave an empty column, you are handing them an incomplete risk monitoring register. So please make sure that every column has something in it, because it's important. It's got a purpose. So referring to your examples, if you look at your risk register, you can rate the risk, its likelihood, and the impact should it happen, which gives you the rating that you're going to give it. For example, you're writing about the risk of a tornado in Sydney, and you'd say, well, the likelihood of that is pretty rare, so it brings us here on this level, but the impact would be severe. So, or significant, or well, it could be more, I don't know, who knows? A tornado doesn't have to be, life ending, but I suppose it could be pretty high. So tornado is, the likelihood of it happening is rare, but if it happened, it would be severe. So if you were going to put tornado in Sydney, this would be your risk rating. Okay, that's a little bit extreme, but every risk that you identify, you do need to give it a rating. The likelihood of it happening, the impact should it happen, and then wherever those two lines meet is your rating. Okay. So returning to the register directory, the next red one is assets. Pretty easy. Everything you buy, maybe call it, give yourself a threshold, whether it's $200 or $500. So everything you purchase of an asset nature over $200, you're going to list on here, so that you can keep a really good eye on what you've got, where it is, and what the serial numbers are. Because you will, at points in time, retire those assets. And also you'll be able to see if they've been lost as well. So it's mostly very important for not-for-profits, but it's certainly not unimportant for small business. So then we come back to our next one, which is delegation register. Now, what this means is, call this the plan B. This is what every auditor is going to be looking for. Doesn't have to look like this. This is just my way of addressing that. And that is, what's going to happen if the owner of the business or the manager of the business, the one person holding it up, gets run over by a bus? So it's plan B. Who's going to be able to make decisions? So I have a list here of most of the decisions and actions that sort of go on inside business. And then the principal or the owner or the CEO, obviously has unlimited decision-making power there, but then you need to delegate it to somebody else who's going to be able to make those decisions in your absence in case something happens to you, because it's of most importance to the NDIS or any funder that if something happens to you, the show has to go on. And that means that staff get paid and participant gets serviced. So they want to see that you've got a plan B and that you've delegated some responsibility and authority to other people, not just verbally or mentally, telepathically. It's in writing. It's there to be referred to. The auditors are going to ask for it, and it's in place, and everything can go on even if you contract COVID, which wouldn't be nice, but we don't know what's around the corner. And our last one here, that's all of the red ones. So that's terrific. So we have now done all of the compliance registers that we need for stage 1. So let's just pretend now that we're going to say, right, they're all done. I've got all the documents from my stage 1 checklist. I've written them up in my compliance register, which is my helicopter view of everything and monitoring everything. And now we're going to move. We've had our stage 1. We've found out if we have any gaps in our documentation. And now we're moving to our stage 2, which is going to be a face-to-face, whether it's in person or via Zoom. We are moving to the next level, which is our stage 2. So here I am sharing the NDIS provider stage 2 audit checklist. So you've got your three folders for information, and you've got your compliance register, which you will put in the 3rd folder called governance, because the compliance register is governance and compliance. So now we're going to make sure you've got all your policies and procedures and you've read them. All your registers are complete and they're in that folder ready for stage 2. Do not take the registers apart. Try to keep them in one, because the biggest disasters that I've seen have been when people have separated out those registers. The biggest safety net is having them together and never getting them lost. And that's been something that I've experienced over the years, is moving one folder and then it gets lost and HR never getting looked at for 2 years. You don't want that. Having them together really is your safety net. Your quality management system is also part of everything you're doing in terms of that compliance register. That series of compliance registers is actually quality management and compliance management working together. Inside your register, though, you actually have a dedicated quality management register, which is right here in the white, because quite often you haven't, in most cases when you're new and you're going into your first audit for NDIS, you won't have had the requirement to use a quality improvement register yet. So I'm just looking for it. But here it is. And what I say about this is, you'll go into this, if you're brand new, you're probably not going to have anything in it. But if you're going back for your second audit 18 months down the track, or third or fourth, this should be full. It would be really frightening to see that it's not. And it means that people just really aren't bothering. They're only just sort of doing what they have to before audit. And that really shows in other ways in services as well. So this would be, what I like to say is, for your quality improvement plan or action plan, the things that feed this are going to be complaints, incidents, work health safety, and any improvements that you make on the spur of the moment, even if it's not the result of an incident or it's not the result of a complaint. So these things, I call this the quality improvement ocean, and the rivers are the complaints, the river of complaints, the river of feedback, the river of incidents. They all feed into the quality improvement register, because it's where those things go wrong that you want to reflect on it and make changes and put in place a quality action item. So it makes sense that complaints and incidents and work health safety issues and feedback are going to be really informing your quality improvement. It doesn't mean it has to be limited to that. If something's not working for you, that's a time to put your heads together and say, right, how can we improve this? But you could go to audit with an empty one of these and say to the auditor, they'll say, you've got nothing in your quality improvement plan and you've been operating for 2 years. So why is that? And you'll say, well, we've done lots of improvements. We've done so many. I can tell you all about the improvements we've done. And you start giving her details about the improvements you've made. And she's going to say, where's the evidence? And if you can't show her that evidence, but I changed a policy and I made a form, yeah, but that's not evidence in itself. What the evidence is the date, the issue that you had, the risk that issue represented, how you collaborated and planned that, what the actual improvement was, and did you monitor it and review it and come back and go, yep, that was really good and we're going to keep it. Or no, it's not quite working. Let's give it another go back to the drawing board. If you haven't got evidence, as far as an auditor is concerned, it didn't happen. So don't let all of your good work and quality improvement ideas and actions go to waste. Just list them. It takes so little time and it is so important in quality improvement and in running a good business. So that's our continuous quality improvement. The other things, if you're going into your, if you're going into your first audit, but you have clients in place, then every support plan that you have, whether you have 2 clients or 20, please have some way to monitor when that support plan is due. It's not enough that there's just a support plan in every one of the folders. If you have a software that monitors it and gives you an alert when the support plan is due to be renewed, that's great. But if you don't have that software, then please list all your clients and their support plan due dates. That is not an NDIS plan. That is the support plan that you as a service individually design to ensure that client can meet their goals within the NDIS support plan. So this is the plan, the support plan that you make for your client. And if you have a support plan, then that means you've done an assessment on a client, then you're probably or possibly going to have some risks. If you found risks as you were doing an assessment for somebody in getting ready for the support plan, then it would be a really good idea to list those risks in here. Very similar to your corporate risk, but it's all centered around the person and any of their identified risks, whether it's that they have allergies, whether it's that they have seizures, whether it's that they like to abscond or run away or break away from the group, whether it's they're aggressive, whether that they don't take their medication. If it represents a risk during your assessment process, you can see that, then the duty of care is on you as a provider to then have a risk management strategy. Most common thing I see people don't do, biggest non-conformity, that and not having a corporate risk register. Risk is just not something that we overlook. So participant risk and corporate risk, incredibly important. So if you have risks assessed within your support plan process, then you really need to deal with those risks by making a management strategy. So there we have support plan, participant risk register, staff performance appraisal. You should have a date in there where you schedule for each staff member, so it's on the tip of your head, you don't forget. Supervision schedule. If you've got support workers, I would strongly suggest that you provide some kind of fortnightly or monthly practice supervision, especially if you have high need clients and complex clients, because they can really wear a service out. The more incidents you have, the more indicative it is that you need supervision and upskilling of your staff. The more fatigued your staff are, the same goes for that. And the more turnover of staff you have, it means that something's not working. Feedback register, we encourage getting feedback from staff. We encourage getting feedback from participants and their family. We like to know through a complaint process feedback form if we dealt with that complaint as well as they would have liked us to. Were there any improvements that they think we could have made in the way we handled it? Were we too slow? Were we not understanding or empathetic enough? Did they not get the outcome that they were hoping for? And so I think grievance stands, it's quite clear what grievance is, just a way to make lists of grievances if you don't have another way to do that. If you have clients who have any kind of restrictive practice, you must, under the practice standards, you must keep a register of every time you use that restrictive practice or any kind of restrictive practice. You also, under the practice standards, are obligated to have an internal audit schedule. So once again, if you are about to go to audit for your first time, and that means you're going to have a midterm audit in about 18 months, you'd probably want to do an internal audit of your service halfway through so that you're able to see where you're at and whether you're keeping things in the way that they're intended to be under the practice standards, and in terms of also helping you get ready for that next big audit that you'll be going through at midterm. Conflict of interest register. So this is for two levels, really. You have organisational conflict of interest, which might be when people are always hiring their cousins, wives and everything else. There's a conflict of interest there. It's just something that happens, but what you need to do is declare it. So the antidote for conflict of interest is transparency. The last thing I want is for somebody else to start talking about it behind my back. So if I am really clear and keep ensure that people know that, yes, what I'm about to do is a bit of a conflict of interest, but, I want you all to know that this is how I'm going to manage it. In my own business, if I were going to hire my daughter, This is a conflict of interest. I can see that. I may treat her differently to others, but here is me letting you know that I'm going to do this, and here is what I decided my strategy is to ensure I'm not going to manage her directly. Somebody else is going to manage her, and therefore I'm really trying to mitigate and reduce that conflict of interest, because it doesn't make for a happy workplace when there's favoritism being talked about behind other people's backs. And you also have the conflict of interest with participants. So, for example, especially when you have an organisation that delivers support coordination and other services. So wherever that's the case, it is required that you manage that by having a conflict of interest register, but also discussing that with the participant and their carer or guardian if need be, so that they understand that you're bringing to the table there's a conflict of interest. We're support coordinating for you and we're delivering your services, and this is how we're going to manage it. We're going to manage it, you're doing X, Y, Z. You really want you to be the one that introduces the fact that there's a conflict of interest, than somebody else to bring it up behind your back. That's just not the way that you just don't want people talking about you behind your back. Conflict of interests are going to happen, but it's the way we manage them that matters. So that really brings us to the end. We've done stage 1 and stage 2, and we've looked at a compliance management system. By the time that you work your way through that, you're going to have a very clear analysis of what your gaps are and what you've done well, and there's always things that you've done well. So it's not just about finding all the things that aren't good, it's about also patting yourself on the back for what you've done well. So stage 1, stage 2, compliance management system, we're going to put those into an email out to all of you, and you'll be able to use them. There's a 2-page instruction for the compliance register, which is incredibly simple, and I'm sure you could see that it's going to be very easy to put those things together. It really is a helicopter view of everything in your folders, so that you don't go running into 20 different folders to see what date people's licenses are due to be renewed, basically. And so it helps you to manage your risk in a very big way. So I think that I'd just like to thank everyone for coming along. And please, in the next hour and a half, you will have those documents in your email box. So thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you again.